I'll go ahead and call the February 19th, 2026 special meeting of the Cumberland County Board of Commissioners to order. I'd like to welcome everyone here. Thanks for being here on a Thursday afternoon. And we will go ahead and move forward with invocation and pledge. And I'd ask Commissioner Faircloth to bring us the invocation and pledge.
Thank you, Lord, once more for the opportunity to do business for our county. We ask that these proceedings be acceptable in your sight and in the sight of those who need souls. In Christ's name, amen.
Amen.
1 minute of pledge of allegiance, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
A couple quick comments before we move through the agenda. Just to remind and kind of set the purpose of this meeting. We as the board talked about having our economic development team come in and talk about data centers, the type of data centers that are out there. As we know, there's data centers that are looking at different communities across not just our state but across the nation. And so we wanted to make sure the board had an understanding of the types of data centers that are out there, what it means, and be able to have a conversation with our economic developer, but also then begin to look at what are some options out there from a regulatory standpoint, from zoning, from those types of things, so that our goal coming away from this. And not today, I don't expect votes. This will probably be more informational unless people are ready to move forward on something, but we're not going to have anything in front of us today. So this will be more of a conversation on gaining insights, but allow us to have that framework for what we want to see in the community, what are the options out there from a zoning standpoint, from a regulatory standpoint, understanding the types of data centers so that when we're looking at Robert Van Giens from the Economic Development, and he's bringing his project, that he already knows kind of where we are and what we want to see in direction, but also give some direction to staff to begin to look at the regulatory side of this. So that's the purpose and why we're here. We're going to get some information on the data centers. We're going to talk a little bit about zoning. I don't expect any votes today unless there's a will of the board to do that. We want to have this information session. We are live streaming. This is an important issue across our community. So we are live. It'll be posted on our YouTube page as well. I just want to make sure everybody is aware of that. County Manager, any comments or anything that you'll need from us on the far side of this?
No, today is more informational, Chairman Devier, and as we look towards the future, data centers are going to be one of the key elements of technology for not only our organization but the community and the state at large. So this is just an informational update, maybe some general guidance as far as what we need to do from a staff level for next steps.
All right, with that, I'll move to item 1, and I'll entertain approval of the agenda. Commissioner Faircloth, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Are there any additions or changes to the agenda, Mr.
No, Commissioner Faircloth, no changes to the agenda.
This time I would.
Mr. Chairman, go ahead.
You're wearing that old hat. It's okay.
Old hat is
I'm assuming there's no changes, but it's all right.
At this time, I would move that we approve the agenda.
Second.
We've got a motion to approve the agenda with no changes. It's been properly seconded. Any discussion or comments on the motion? Hearing none. Are we up?
About the computer? Marshall didn't bring me either. I brought.
We'll do verbal.
I'm just telling on you.
All in favor, raise your right hand.
Took care of that.
That did take care of that.
Moving forward, commissioners, please bring your iPads.
Man, it's been a long day already, Mr. Chairman. Ooh.
All right, we'll go ahead and move to item 2, data center overview. First item is, of course, the data center overview. So, County Manager Greer, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yes, I'll turn this over to Robert Van Giens, President Chief Executive of the Fayetteville Cumberland Economic Development Corporation. He'll provide an overview and some of the efforts that FCEDC has performed over the last couple of months regarding data centers. Robert.
Thank you for this opportunity. I know that your County Planner Ross Howard has some thoughts and commentary. We've been coordinating on some of these conversations over the last couple of days here.
Mr. Van Giens, before you continue, I just want to make sure Vice Chairman Jones will be online with us, so she's in this meeting virtually. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. So I think just these are some items I'd hope to bring forth for discussion today. You know, I think it maybe recently press has caught up to what over the last, we'll say, 5 to 7 years has been a rapidly growing sector of our economy, both the increase in quantity and the scale of intensity of data centers. As we talk about the past and your existing ordinances, I think you'll see that what we want to see in the future are things that we need to address, but you can also see by what we had in the past, the concerns might not have been as great. A little bit about the site utility requirements, what you have in the county already as far as potential locations, factors limiting their size, economic benefits, and the concerns that are raised by them, as well as some recommendations from a staff level. So just for comparison, the 30 megawatt number is what you would consider a very large and very intense industrial operation traditionally. Anything over 10, 15, 20 megawatts is probably, 20 years ago, the largest power consumer in your community. They often created a lot of jobs. They also had a lot of industrial processes that we'll talk about a little bit later. And you can see now the scale of corporate data centers for one single user, these that support your iPhone documents and your cloud computing, and then up going on from there into cryptocurrency mining, which came through. We actually have an operation here in the city limits here in the county, and then hyperscalers, which are by far the largest now and the most talked about projects that are underway. I believe there's close to 100 projects either built or being built or announced here in North Carolina currently. So talking about the evolution of data centers, and this is where I come back to saying that I think if you look at the AIT building, or even here in downtown Kannapolis, the research campus, the Segra Data Chambers facility, these are buildings that you saw in your downtowns, in your light industrial areas, and they have inside of them servers, they have some cooling, they have power to them, but it's not on the scale of what, and this is a very early one here in North Carolina, the Apple campus in Maiden, which I believe now is well over is a multi-billion-dollar operation there. You can see then the size of buildings, the power usage, and how that has taken off, which says since these things are different, at least from my perspective, and why we raise it up, is that perhaps we need to establish some performance parameters on how to handle these much more intense versions of data centers that have grown up. I think the chairman touched on it briefly there. Throughout all of our conversations we've had about projects coming, I think the most important thing is for the commissioners to set a direction, especially when talking economic development, about what we want to see, what we expect, and then we can put on it the restrictions and requirements for performance we need, as opposed to being caught in a moment of having to respond to someone walking into the permitting office. So, site and infrastructure requirement. For now, I'm going to mostly talk about these larger standalone projects versus these smaller ones. Although I think it is important, we'll talk later about defining the differences between them. Most look for 100 megawatt electrical service, and I'll be frank that where you have power infrastructure and where you have the capacity to supply that, if you've got land, you likely have interest from a data center. If you add to that some level of water, in our case it would be PWC water, then you would definitely be seeing some interest eventually from data centers. And so I think depending on cooling technology, after power comes the water capacity. I didn't put in here, and I should have, the size of the desired site scales with the capacity available. However, I would say that you are looking at, on a small side, 150 acres, 200, 250, and 300 is where you start to see it. But again, the more power you have, the larger the site that they will be looking for. Also, too, I think it's important to note, you can have the power and you can have the water, but if you don't have a willing property owner, then you don't have a project. So I think that's just one other side of it, too. It has to be land that is readily available. Backup generation can be provided by varying means. That can be gas turbines, that can be diesel-based generators, it can be battery storage. In some places, they're working towards hydrogen fuel cells. And that, I think, is the amount of that and the frequency with which it's tested will be something we talk about. And some are proposing on-site power generation, which reduces reliance on the grid. And that starts to take away that, maybe some of that concern by where the power lines and capacity currently are. I will say, and I'm going to jump to the end of my recommendation at the beginning, power generation by an independent third party in our community that is not a utility causes me a bit of pause and says that might be one we really want to look at going through a very intense process. I could just see a variety. As new technologies come online, I'm all for it. I think we have to find ways to grow our base load across the board. I'm pro green energy as much as we possibly can, but at the same time, we're used to it in the context of either being PwC South River, Columbia Electric, or Duke Energy. So, and you do have existing zone properties with adequate capacity through it that will be attractive to data centers. So it is zoned, it is got the utilities, and if it's for sale, it can be acquired by a developer. And I, again, really recommend, and our board was talking about this, and which entered the conversation, that we think this is a conversation we need to have in front of a project versus at the end. So for us, and I am, to be clear, when this is recorded, I hope nobody cuts it out, I am not saying the data center should be your primary goal. But if it were, if you said to me, all we want is, I think it's important as we talk about context on the lay of the land, there are a number of self-limiting factors in our community that would make that run out at a few projects. We do not have here the capacity on the electrical grid or the generation available out there to supply the largest projects that are out there today or multiples in close proximity to each other. One of the concerns in some corridors of data centers is the high concentration of these operations and harmonic resonance. I believe that is something we all need to be aware of. I will say, though, physically, it is not possible to put a whole bunch of large data centers next to each other in Cumberland County because of our grid and the capacity that's out there. Not to say it's not something to be concerned about, just the actuality of what we're operating with here. Smaller centers exist and are likely, and we have had at times some interest from things in that smaller than a manufacturing operation, and those provide unique opportunities for research, for development of new technologies, for testing products, for looking into the human genome and things along those lines. So I think determining what these different types of centers are through our regulations based on what their impacts and technologies are is critical. The grid and capacity issues are, again, what's driving that on-site storage conversation. So projects can range in investment from hundreds of millions of dollars to multiple billions. At the current tax rate, just putting it out there, I know it's technically $4,990,000 and change, but if you raise your tax rate by a penny in the future, it'll be $5. But roughly for each $1 billion of investment, that is a $5 million in property tax revenue for the county, a little less if it were in the city limits or one of the towns there. The jobs that come with these do pay very well. They are technology jobs, they provide good benefits. We are trying to grow that sector, but unlike other projects that have a high utility intensity, they create jobs on the order of dozens or maybe 100 plus. So while there's not a large volume, they are quality jobs. When you look at revenue, we often talk about what is the return on investment when you do incentives. And incentives are one way that you also can shape the projects that end up coming here. When it comes to these, the inducement is the infrastructure. So they are not driven by incentives as, say, a lot of our manufacturing projects we've done are. It is where they have the ability to deliver to their customer the data computing or to themselves, the data computing needed in a rapid timeline. And also I think these projects provide needed IT infrastructure. I think it's interesting when you talk about this, how many people are looking up things about data centers on their phones in ChatGPT or one of the others, which is using a data center to do that. So there's no denying that we need this infrastructure out there if we're going to continue to advance and utilize these technologies. Interestingly, though, when you break it down, many of the actual activities that occur at a data center are in place at other operations in the county and around the Carolinas. Their water usage, as it would be done in North Carolina on our system, is similar to other large industrial operations that utilize water for equipment cooling. Wastewater, also similar to other large industrial operations that use it for cooling. Water comes in from the PwC system, it cycles through the facility, it is then pre-treated as needed and discharged back in. Equipment noise. These cooling fans, I will say technology is always evolving, but the vast majority use these types of, they create a low hum that generates substantial noise. This is actually, I won't say the company's name, this is something we dealt with when a manufacturer landed in another community I worked with, and 3 blocks away, cooling fans on a textile operation caused that hum, and how do you buffer, how do you provide that barrier? This is not radically different technology in any way of that there. Air emissions. While there are limitations on how much on-site backup generators can run on a regulatory side, unlike other industrial projects that might have smokestacks or this is primarily where you would see your emissions come from, is in that backup power generation, or if you had on-site power generation. So what is uncommon about it? Even that textile plant I mentioned, it shut down third shift, or it went to a lighter shift, or it was off on the weekends. These are running 24/7 unless something really goes wrong. And if something kind of goes wrong, that's when they get even louder because they're running their backup generators to try to keep going or utilizing their battery storage. If they're not using generators, depending on their size, or even with that, there is potential for a large amount of fuel to be on site for battery storage. Depending on the technology, I don't know if anybody saw back in San Francisco, I believe it was, about 2 years ago, there was a cascading failure on a lithium-ion plant. So these are the types of things that need to be looked at and considered, that it's not just keeping a small plant going or allowing a piece of equipment to shut down for 10 or 15 minutes. They're looking to keep this facility going with a sizable amount of backup capacity. And again, that it is uncommon for companies to say, I'm thinking about generating a couple hundred megawatts of power for myself. Normally we talk about solar, we talk about some of these other things. Now that is an exception in a growing area, but I think it's one, again, this is about being prepared for what is yet to come versus reacting to it. And the volume of power they're requesting, the exponential size over regular traditional projects is uncommon. So, recognizing this, North Carolina has made a number of changes in their policies. I think that some of the projects that have caused the greatest conflict with their neighbors are ones that came through earlier. But now, just to get in the queue to be considered for service, you have to provide a 6-figure plus study charge. The potential customer has to own the land, have it zoned and entitled for data centers, which to some extent, one, reduces the commitment to a project that is not going to happen, so that capacity is available for other projects. But also, two, it kind of takes some of that off of someone coming, I've got this letter that says I can do it, and you here are not going to let me. That has to be done beforehand. And importantly, projects have to pay for their transmission costs up front for the upgrade. I'll talk a little more about that. This is something that is close to, we'll talk a little more about the additional issues around this before I get to this next one here. And the other side is, and this is where North Carolina has lost some interest from some data centers, is that when it comes time, just like we do with natural gas, if it's a cold day in February and they need to run gas turbines or heat the hospital, companies now, this is relatively new in the last year, have to accept up to 100, I think it's 1,000, I think, no, I have to look back, 100 hours a year, it's 100 hours a year of interruption on their operation. So cold day like we had a couple months ago, they may have to just go dark. And so there also is now, and I forgive me because, when you know what's coming, you talk about it a little bit earlier, when we'll talk about it, there are issues at the local level that are directly within your regulatory framework. Then there's issues I'm sure will concern you as representatives of our citizens at a greater level, and some of that is how utility rates are set and what the cost of future generation capacity means to the taxpayer. There is currently both a study group that has just released its interim finding in Raleigh and a number of bills working their way through the legislature where they are looking at policies that would potentially have a tariff rate for large customers that require them to pay a substantial portion and ensure that the new generation capacity needed by them is not shifted to the rate payer. And while these are not part of your zoning or your noise ordinances, they are things I'm sure you'll be concerned about and our citizens will be. How does it affect me? So here are some concerns that have been raised in other places. There have been projects that were not, in my opinion, weren't done right. There are projects that I would not want. And somebody said, well, how do you feel about this being right next door to you? Well, I don't think it should be right next door to anybody who's got a residential house, but in some places they were put right there. A lot of the concerns about water usage, some places pull groundwater, their environment is different, they use evaporative cooling. Comes off as steam, but that water is then no longer in the aquifer. In the case here in North Carolina, that would not be something that is readily looked to be used, and that it would then go back into the system with a minimal loss to us there and be pre-treated as we discussed before. Uncontrolled discharge of cooling water in places where you pull from the water and they discharge directly into either the aquifer or storage tanks or something like that, that has been a concern. That is not something we'd be looking, that we'd be doing here in Cumberland County because we began would be using a loop of a public utility infrastructure. And then we talked about then there has been projects where the actual building itself damaged the wells and aquifer in the surrounding area. I'd say to you that that is a bad project, period, but whether it was an automotive plant, a steel plant, or a data center, that is a bad construction project that damaged people's lives and property values, but it's not the operations of a data center itself that did that there. And those are ones that frequently come up, with the last one being brownouts and power availability. Now, brownouts themselves, that is what that interruptible component is designed to avoid. Now, that said, we want to be 100% intellectually honest about this, which is one of the issues with data centers here, is it still will be stress on the power grid. There will be more demand, more systems, more pull, and there will also be, it's not our place to regulate how the utility providers necessarily choose their customers, but we also need to understand the fact that 250 megawatts over here means that a 50 megawatt advanced manufacturing facility next door won't be able to access that same power. So there's a certain amount of limit to the overall volume of electrical ions out there until new generation is built or until such a time as there is on-site power generation that's feasible. The emissions from backup generation, that is something that, while regulated by the DEQ and air quality, something that is real and has to be accounted for. Noise is probably the single greatest impact on a residential property within the vicinity. And so, especially when the backup generation occurs. So whether it's limiting hours, noise mapping, buffers, and the like, that is something there that I know that you're going to feel is important to address. And then lastly, that item on the electrical, the impact on the electrical ratepayers, that may or may not be something that you wish to make part of your overall state and federal policy level discussions. Again, it's not a zoning ordinance item, but it is something worthy of concern. So I would say to you that data centers, they operate legally, they're taxpayers, they do create jobs, but they should also be considered. These large centers should be scrutinized as you would any other intense industrial process, because that is what it is. It doesn't have the output of a physical commodity, but it does have the inputs of those, and then it is outputted into a value-added item, which is that data processing. So if you think back, it was before my time, you talked about, I think there was a ethanol plant that was looked at and weighed. Then you go back further than that, I know that asphalt plants in every community was one that came up at different times. And so as you would want to be prepared for a project like that, and you are in your ordinances, I would argue that you need to be prepared for something along those lines. So I encourage you to adopt regulations to protect your neighbors surrounding property owners from potential negative impacts, be that screening, sound, buffering, monitoring, as the case may be, and definitions that clearly define the different types of data centers. I don't think anyone is looking to say that Booz Allen Hamilton on their third floor can't have a server room. There are projects here we looked at that they can be an adaptive reuse of a building that doesn't have significant on-site generation, that doesn't have that cooling. That would be, I think something if they're working in AI or production of animation and movies, why not have something like that? And then as they grow out into this full-scale standalone purpose-built facility, being one, and I would say though, of all of them, the on-site power generation for primary operation, not backup, is one that I would strongly encourage you to make a special use in your regulations. Coming around again to today is if you have a site that is zoned correctly and someone were to purchase it and it has the utilities and they come and ask you for a zoning permit, that is not the time where we want to be saying what our expectation and standards are. Because when you don't have incentives as a driver, your land use regulations are your best tool for ensuring compatible and quality development on that. So I know Rawls has some things he would like to share. I'd be happy to answer any questions. At the same time, again, too, where there's buffer, where there's separation, this is, again, no more intense and in many ways less intense than a lot of your other industrial operations. It just has to be in the right place for this new kind of industry.
So I want to make sure, kind of looking at the agenda, kind of captured probably all of 2. So we've got A, B, C, and D. So we've got data centers, FCEDC efforts, infrastructure needs, and incentives. I'm going to pause because you went through a lot of information and go ahead before we move to start talking about zoning, but let's kind of have a conversation around the economic development. I want to open it up to the commissioners for questions, comments. Let me make sure I get a list here. Commissioner Tyson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Van Giens, for that very thorough presentation. Appreciate your time here today. One question, and you kind of hit on it, relates to kind of the rate implications for ratepayers of the utility companies. Seeing that we're not the utility business as the county, realistically, as we look to develop our standards for data centers, how can we help to shape that? Is that just conversations with those utility providers about them adding that to their requirements? Or if we put that in place as a restriction on our side, is that something that those utility companies have to follow?
Yeah, I would say, and to be clear, I'm speaking for myself alone, and anything I say that is regarding a policy issue is not the position of the commissioners, and I don't want to get y'all in any trouble on that. The reality is, I guess there's 2 ways to look at it. One, if it's going to be built on the Carolina system, it's still going to need the additional generation. So having it here, the jobs, the revenue, that's a positive versus the alternative. That is a utility commission conversation, and that is a generous assembly legislative conversation. So it's really a policymaker side of things. The reality is, unfortunately, with the 2008 recession, we took down coal and we added renewables and some battery storage, all for that. But we didn't substantially add new base load generation with the exception of some gas-fired plants. So we need new generation for industry, for the growth of our populations, and for our overall quality, and to get off some of those more intense and older generation plants, some of which are coming back online. So I think the thing is, it's both advocating for new generation without, or ensuring that we also have policies that don't soak the residential ratepayer or the general business person for the capacity that will be utilized by these industries. I don't feel, though, that it is something that you on the local level can weigh in on. I guess I'd flip that around and let's pretend it's a company that manufactures hoverboards. If we were to say to them, you can only have this much electric capacity, where would that put you with PwC or Duke or South River? So I think there it's a matter of we need to be aggressive on what we can rightfully control as far as development standards and ensuring compatibility, but then also advocate for our citizens as we do with other policy levels where it's not your direct authority to be able to set that as part of it.
Follow-up, Mr. Chairman? Yes, thank you. So as a follow-up to that, would it be your recommendation, or if you were looking to enact this policy, to go ahead and start those advocacy efforts with those other bodies now, immediately, or? On
anything in here, adding this to your use table as far as a definition, setting standards for these types of, or making your policy positions known. There is, every moment that goes by, we are one moment further behind, probably where we need to be in preparation for what's to come, to be frank.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioners, other questions?
Got a list.
Go ahead. You're recognized for a series. I'll give you a little bit of time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Rova, for the wonderful presentation. So, I think when we're looking at a few different factors on this, the tax base, for instance, you I think showed $1 billion investment would generate about $5 million in county tax benefits. With that, kind of what's that tax base constructed of in that investment? So is that, Commissioner Fairclough kind of discussing this earlier, but is that going to be completely in real estate, or a lot of the equipment that depreciates, and will we be able to realize that more than after 5-7 years? Because $1 billion building, it'll stay here and we can tax it forever. But if it's tech, how does that depreciation affect our capacity?
Yeah, I do think, and that's also an interesting point on the different types of data-intense operations that are out there. Crypto mining runs a very different set of servers as opposed to AI and hyperscalers, where they are constantly replacing and literally running after the next chip drop, for that there, and even building partnerships with the manufacturers themselves. It would be there would be a substantial amount to the tune of hundreds of millions in buildings and hard infrastructure, power buses, things like generators especially with our gas systems, have a much longer depreciation schedule than, say, service. So racking, rigging, the buildings, the load cranes, the switch gears, the internal transformers, those have a longer period of time. The actual computing racks, those will actually be replaced currently today. The way it operates is they are replaced as soon as reasonably possible with the new technologies coming on. I think the challenge is there's such a demand for these chips and these servers that they can only get them so fast. And I think that is something that will have to be looked at going forward on what actually plays out. To be fair, a lot of these big projects are just now coming online and operating, and these are the ones that perhaps, I think I was listening to a story about a woman from Chicago where it's right next door to her house. Today, any reputable data center company would go, hold on, we're not going to do that, because they are making changes in what they're proposing, from utility consumption to noise to separations to power generation. But it's evolving. And so what is permitted today won't be built for 2 to 3 to 4 years, and we're not going to see that first round of depreciation hit and or replacement years out. And that's again too why I think those things, that building will always have a use with that power, with that connectivity. That's why it has to be done in a way that provides separation, protection, and ensures the well-being of potentially conflicting uses, because it might not keep that. I wouldn't say do this on the tax value alone. I'd say do it because it's a lawfully operating business that complies with all of the requirements to be a good corporate citizen in your community.
Thank you. And I guess, then kind of still looking at the electrical component, is there any data out there that you have kind of forecasting what the demand organically for the county would be from an electric standpoint for 15, 25, 30 years from now? And kind of, that way we can kind of measure it to what we would need theoretically and what size?
That is actually one of the statements coming out of the interim study in Raleigh right now, is that it is hard because they're not online yet to what will they act. Everyone, whether it's a power company told Salisbury they needed 25 million gallons of water a day. At their height, they used 7. Customers say, I need 300 megawatts. You get on there and they end up using 110. And that's also part of the challenge for some of the providers. So to be honest, it's hard. It's hard getting really great data. But there is projections for our system. While we have PwC in Lumbee and South River, unless you're served by Dominion, we're all at the end of the day on the same bi-state Carolinas generation network, and for that there is, I want to say it's, and somebody, if anybody's read it, stop me, 60% future demand over the next, I want to say it was 20 years, was that too high on that, Commissioner Adams?
That's about right.
Yeah, over the next 10 or 20 years or so. So we're all, without data centers, we still have a need for more generation capacity, but that is out there. We can get that to you on the overall system projections.
Thank you. I guess, not to monopolize any more time, but just one last question. I'll kind of give it back. I've seen, kind of researching, like you mentioned, I don't think the county needs to give away any incentives or anything like that, but are there examples that you found where we can maybe get some assets into the community that we need, like maybe a new school that they'll build for us if we'll only come here?
I met with an enviable community in another state. By enviable, saying that when it comes to technology and applied innovation and the quality jobs they have, we'd love to be more like them. And what they said to me about data centers is, in their case, we have limited supply, so we're not incentivizing them. However, if we get a partner that is an end user that is willing to commit to multi-year partnerships around education, investment, job creation, apprenticeships, giving back to the community, that is someone we want to work with. If it's some agnostic hyperscaler to be determined, that's when they say, well, then we can't stop you if it's legal, but we're also not going to be inducing you into that. I would say, especially some of those things can come into play in your overall considerations as you get into if anybody should need a land use change or the other side of it. And ultimately, there has been a shift with the reputable top-tier companies to being much more engaged in that community partnership. If you were head out to Catawba County, there is nobody complaining about what Apple has meant out there. At least I don't know. There's one guy who got a couple $1 million for 2 acres of land. I know he's not complaining anymore. But, again, so I think it's also, we want to have good corporate citizens here. But when you don't incentivize, you do lose a little of that leverage. I am not advocating for you to incentivize. The truth is, I think you need to have regulations in place. But if it's your direction that, this is not something we really want to, I defer to your judgment on where we want to go as a community.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Anybody else? First round, Commissioner Adams.
Yes, thank you. So, data centers all over North Carolina having the same issue. And they use about 1 to 5 million gallons of water a day. That's about where we are, right? Mm-hmm. And so we all gonna have an issue because they're looking at Apex, they're looking at Chatham, they're all gonna pull out of that same Cape Fear River, Neuse River. It's gonna be an issue as they pull this out, and some of that's for the cooling. And we already have an issue with that, and if you look at the news in the morning, we're already in a drought in this part. It's gonna cause more concern here with that water issue is a major issue, I think, when we're talking about these data centers and their cooling aspect of it.
And if I may on that, I think that is something, and I looked to the attorney, this is where I think it's discussion versus outcome. That is not a concern if it is a closed-loop system that goes back in. I am not sure what we can require as far as connectivity for certain types of operations. Because to your point, if they were to pull from the Cape Fear and use evaporative, which they wouldn't use in our environment, then we don't get it back. If it goes back in, we've got adequate capacity in the system.
And that comes from PwC.
Right.
Which we already have in terms of what we're talking about, an agreement with PwC to draw water from that, which puts a strain on us in terms of as we're moving toward Grays Creek to be able to do all of that. Everybody can't draw off this same water, and so much water coming off of there. We kind of handicapped a little bit because most of this is going to be Duke Energy, PwC, all of those utility companies, as opposed to the county where we're not the utility business. And I think that's where you talk about having those conversations early on.
If I could just, one I forgot from earlier, sir, one of the other check valves in place is PwC, if you're on their system, and our other municipal providers, will not allow a draw that jeopardizes fire flows.
Right.
So, there are places where we've got the ability to do 3 million gallons of water on a water line. If it's in another part of the county, and there's only 500,000 gallons a day, they're not allowed to pull so much that it causes a fire flow issue. So those are some of the regulatory things we have in place if it's on a public system.
Right. And basically, when we're looking at this, all of these local utility companies we get all buy from Duke Energy. And so the grid is going to be through, and the pricing is going to be through basically Duke Energy, what they push up and down. PwC is already asking for a rate increase in this community. And we talk about these data centers and the amount of electricity they pull down off of that grid. It's going to, I have to look at my refrigerator every day when I get ready to wash my dishes. Am I in the morning or am I in the afternoon? It's a higher rate because of business and Monday through Friday. This electric grid is going to cause that to even be more, well, they're doing it 24/7.
Yeah, and I think that is, and I've never been a good one to say where does your ability to advocate for policy end under under the statute and such, but this is a conversation right now in Raleigh that's happening, and whether you have the data center or not, when it happens in the Carolinas, your citizens will be impacted.
Right.
And so I'd say even, especially if it's not here, all the more reason why we have to be aggressive about that policy.
Well, and that's what gives me concerns. We put one here, put one Apex, one put in Raleigh, wherever. All of that's going to hit every one of us all over the state in terms of that high capacity, in terms of that utility rate. You talked about the IT part. A lot of IT remote though, but most of these data centers don't really have a whole lot of employees. So it is to Commissioner Patel basically going to be what you get off the property tax and off of the equipment. Is that correct?
Yeah, no, you'll have on-site dozens of good-paying jobs. That's an interesting for us. We are growing that sector, but we don't have Raleigh or Durham's IT sector. So for us, 100 tech jobs across 2 facilities is a good bump in that overall segment of our workforce. But it is not thousands, it's not hundreds, it's not the same as a Goodyear or a Mann-Hummel, that's for sure.
And my last question, Mr. Chairman. Because they're all different sizes of these data centers, what is it in terms of the wastewater? When you're talking about the wastewater infrastructure and displacing that, I know they have the cooling and they're trying to do all of that. But and the capacity, again, it's not going to be us, it's PwC where they can do that reclaimed water, but the wastewater is an issue.
Yeah, it is. I would say though, compared to other industrial operations, no greater impact on that.
One last thing. But no, and I think it's important because I think Robert talked about it, is the noise factor. Because, we already get all those folk who call when our major, Fort Bragg does what they do, and they got to do what they got to do. But people complain about that. They complain about, you on the animal control, about those barking dogs. So when we're looking at this, we really don't need these to be near any kind of residential kind of area because of that hum like I'm hearing right now above my head all the time, 24/7.
Yeah, that is, if I were to say one thing to focus on, it is that independent, engineered, third party, if I were writing something, validation of a pre-approved study with compliance and potentially monitoring at intervals anywhere there is close proximity of residential, because that is something that you want to be able to, people to sit on their back porch at night, you want to be able to there. And that is something that's hard for you to ignore if you got a bit of insomnia at 2:30 in the morning and you're hearing that hum out there. And so from buffering to screening, and again, if they can't do it right, then it probably shouldn't be there, because there is opportunity where we can balance both the economic benefits and the business opportunity for them along against the quality of life of our citizens, and they shouldn't have to be in conflict, which is why I'm so grateful that you are talking about this now, so that you are not in a spot where you have to respond to a project that shows up on your doorstep.
My other one's to deal with the zoning issue, so I'll wait.
We'll get a brief from
Yeah.
the zoning side. Commissioner Tyson, you recognize round two.
Thank you. And Mr. Van Giens, I'm glad you brought up kind of the technology and how that's kind of evolving. And I know the presentation really contemplates most of these larger projects. But I know through some reading and research I've done, there is a push to kind of scale some of this computing power. And even now, they've got the ability to put some of these micro data processing centers, like in overseas containers, for example. And so I guess my question is, as we look to kind of shape this, if I'm one of our manufacturing partners in the area and I've got 30 megawatts of power, but I'm using 5 or 10, what's going to prevent them from saying, hey, you can bring your overseas containers over here, I'll plug them into my system? We're none the wiser about it necessarily. So how do we, on that front, as you're looking and you're saying, hey, the benefit on the real property, I get that, but as it continues to get micro, how do we regulate that portable personal property as that kind of evolves? And what would you recommend?
Yeah, on that, I would say that below 100 megawatts, the different set of regulatory side of things. Companies are paying for their capacity, in that it'd be kind of, I'd be interested if they could do that as a sub-seller of that electrical. But that's where you get into the technology and the impacts generated, in my opinion, should guide your regulations. If that box is inside their warehouse and it doesn't emit a lot of heat or make a lot of noise, okay. But if it's outside and it does have a backup generator that gets tested at 2 a.m. 3 times a week and it's creating noise when it runs, well then that's your criteria, is what is that output of potential conflict from the system. And that is where you shape your definitions in such a way as to account for the type of technology in play. Again, using the entire 3rd floor of your office building to run servers for your overseas operations, not a problem if it's using the same type of air conditioning system you use for your regular HVAC out there. Now you've got, again, generators running next to a residential apartment building. Now we need to talk. And so I think that's where it's going in ahead of time with definitions of these different types of intensities, where they're allowed, where they're not allowed, and what the criteria will be used to regulate them and deem them compliant needs to come into play.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Commissioners, any other questions on round 2 or round 1? A couple things from the chair. Thank you, Mr. Van Giens, for the information and the overview. I think it's good discussion. I'm sure we're going to continue to have these discussions. Commissioner Adams spoke to it a little bit about what we're seeing across North Carolina, but what are we seeing as far as size of whether, and I know not a lot has been put in place, but I'm sure you talk to your peers across the state in commerce, what are we seeing as far as footprints and size of the ones that are, coming across North Carolina right now?
It continues to trend upward, which ironically may take us out of consideration, which if that's the case, so be it on some. It is 150, 250,000 square foot buildings, multiples across the site with 1 to 1.5 stories, if you will, of server racks operating in there. And then you're getting up into the 300, 350 megawatt arena of power utilization and beyond. I have not heard of too many 150 megawatt, which was the old floor, if you will, for these types of projects recently. It's, can you give me 150 megawatts in a couple of months or 2 years, but I want to be scaled up to 500 megawatts and above. I recently had a conversation with someone who just was in town on an entirely different project, who has expertise in this, and talked about a site that had 450 megawatts of capacity out there. It's like, yeah, that's not really enough anymore. That's really not enough in that case. So it continues to grow. But I will say, those are what we hear about. And that's why, again, trying to segment our regulations, there are a lot of great, smaller, IT-intensive projects that help, again, independent companies, defense contractors, animation studios, whatever it might be, that are technically data centers, but they're not hyperscalers. They don't have those impacts in the secondary side. We don't hear about those. We hear about the largest ones. We also hear about ones where it's not something that has been, I think, preset with standards that make it easy for it to go there, where there's conflict between the community and the project.
A second question along the lines of, a lot of conversations, one about where we're going with infrastructure, and I know, you have you're very interested in that piece as well too, as we're, looking from an economic development standpoint on sites and where we can build and what we can do and where you can recruit. As we begin to look at what our community can sustain, is it a smart, in your opinion, a way to look at projections? So as we build out our infrastructure, specifically to the water portion of this, we know where our capacity is. We've had some projections. There's been some studies done around that. Do you think it's beneficial that we go through that exercise to make sure we understand the timing of when that capacity would be there, and that would give us what we could sustain in our community from a data center standpoint?
I think that is wise from two factors. One, where you have the infrastructure in place, which there are segments of our community that can do of our county that can do millions of gallons a day. There you're utilizing a portion of available capacity. It would be very expensive for you to run water and sewer to the places we need to be. Capacity throughout that, you need to build big enough that it brings benefit, but you can't build it so large that it's fallow. So it may be that as you look at these plans, that is something that we proactively convey to all types of high-intensity users to say, hey, look, this isn't the spot. This is not our plan to be out here giving away this kind of capacity to just one operator, when we have the ability to help an entire community grow and bring multiple businesses in this corridor. So it is where you have it, and it's not in conflict. It's a lot easier to think it might be a good fit than where it will be incredibly expensive and then utilize all of the capacity you're investing in later. So I think there would be from two sides, both where you want to go and what you want to be able to put forward to folks.
And I guess the line of where I was going is we're beginning to look at that, what water and sewer capacity, mostly on the water, where do we need to be in 2030, where do we need to be in 2070? I don't know if the factors that have played into that count in this level of, consumption and growth build out. And so as we begin to look at this, we would need to project out and add that additional capacity in if we're going to try to build to that, understanding where we're going to be. But also understanding there is a limiting factor. While we have multiple water vendors, not just one, I'll leave it at that, there's only so much capacity because there's only so much capacity depending on how it's used. So just factoring in that projection would be a safe way for us to additionally shape this.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they will not be able to go where there is not that infrastructure.
Commissioner Adams, recognized for round two.
And we talk about the water part. Mine is, I guess, on the electric grid, if they're pulling down all this wattage, what happens when the next company comes in that could give me 500 jobs and we don't, I guess are they going to, and I guess we have to look at the capacity and talk about the capacity, do we do this for the short term, but when I'm looking at these 500 jobs that this company wanted to come to, they can't get here because we've allowed all of this wattage to be used over here. I think that's some of the infrastructure, because it takes a long time to build out this infrastructure. Duke Power's talking about it, PwC's talking about that. That's got to be a little bit of a concern to us as to, are we stopping other companies from getting here because we've allowed one, along with the water, but they may not need water, but they need that power. Because we've had some companies talk about that.
And I was using water as, but it's all the
But I mean,
infrastructure.
so I wanted the people to know we talking about not just water, but all.
piece.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's just.
No, I think I had that as a bullet point. I don't think I read it, but it was in my bullet point there, that once it's allocated and being utilized, it's not available for other operations.
Commissioners, any other questions before we move to the next? Commissioner, let me get Commissioner Faircloth for round one, and then I'll come back to you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've just been listening to all the conversation. It's fascinating, and I've been doing a lot of independent study on data centers myself in my not so abundant spare time. But one thing I heard in our previous conversation or presentation down at the FAEDC building, that Duke Energy had the capacity for 35 gigawatts, period. I mean, 35 gigawatts. That's, if I'm right, what is that, 350 megawatts? Or, is that right?
Add another couple to it there, but yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
35,000, is that what it is?
I think it's,
Me.
no, I think.
Somebody help me
that'd
with
be,
the math
that'd be on the
A
million side.
gigawatt
Yeah.
is 1,000 megawatts,
Right,
so that's
right.
35,000 megawatts, okay. But if you do the math and you've got 500 megawatts in these things that are coming, not these little 10s and 20s and 30s that we're talking about, but the capacity throughout Duke, and I don't know if that's North and South Carolina or just North Carolina, but the capacity is only so much because every other piece of electrical generation is included in that 35. So So I don't know what the future of this is, but I don't think it's going to be terrestrial. I think Elon Musk and some of them are talking about putting these things in space. So, this may just be a nice general discussion, and it's going to enlighten us and open our eyes, but I think when we get down to the nitty-gritty, we might see something entirely different here. So I don't want us to lock ourselves into thinking about what the reality is going to be like when we start to look at this, because it's going to be a case-by-case basis.
I don't think anyone could have anticipated the rapid growth we've seen in both the volume and scale. At the same time, I think that's where I come back to saying, if you have good regulations in place and you get one, or you get none, or you get two, or it comes for a year and it goes,
We're ready.
The public will be protected. You will have gotten that benefit. You didn't spend any of your incentive dollars because we did it right from the start and protected our citizens, and then we're ready for the next evolution. Because that building will be repurposed with its infrastructure in it for something else. But you very well could be correct that by the time these last ones that are currently being permitted are online, things could be very different, which is, again, why we need to do it right if we do it at all, so that we can ensure that we don't have a proverbial albatross sitting out there somewhere.
Commissioner Patel, you recognize round two.
Is kind of piggybacking off of Commissioner Adams' comments. Rohit, while you may not be able to share everything that you're working on currently, but do you think there are real opportunity costs if we do go with the data center to current projects or areas that you think are lined up for us in the more near-term future?
They are a legal operating enterprise. That if they buy the land and if they've got the utilities and they work within a regulatory framework, That is their choice. Here, you don't hear me saying, let's develop an incentive strategy to go after that. You don't hear me saying, let's build out water lines or sewer lines so we can have a data center there. So, and please, this is going to get me in trouble. I'm going to say it anyway because you know me for my frankness. I also get outcompeted by residential developers taking up prime industrial sites. My charge from you is job creation, evolving and getting better paying jobs for our citizens, and growing the tax base. And so, would I love to have a site for me that a data center might buy, to put a large production out? Sure. I also would like to have that other, residential subdivision along the interstate that, that has utilities to it, so we can put jobs and investment on there. So I always compete against other users. If done right, though, a data center does accomplish some of the things that we try to do through economic development. It provides a large amount of revenue that you can use for schools, for education, for health services, and the like. It does create, while not a large number, a volume of jobs. It does take off capacity from the electrical side that would not be available for other things. At the same time, we don't have, we're not short on either yet. And I know that sounds like I'm kicking the can there, but sure, I'd love to have every piece of serviceable property available for the projects that create the most jobs, good jobs for our citizens, but,
Thank you.
Commissioners, other questions? Still the chair.
I have a question.
Vice Chairman Jones, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is, when do we need to make the decision in regards to what the next direction is going to be? The specific date that you have in mind?
Vice Chairman, from Robert, Mr. Van Giens didn't bring any particular projects today. I think, and I don't want to speak for him, I'll let him speak, but I think it's more of, as the board requested and as you had requested as well, we begin to get this dialogue started so we can look at taking some direction to staff to provide guidance on any regulatory things that we want to do. So there's not an immediate decision on any project or anything that we have to make right now. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I think there's been some coverage on it. There was just be clear, there is no Dunn Road data center out there. That is somebody who keeps putting that out there and won't take it down. He's under a cease and desist by the property owner. That one straddles the line between the city and the county. There has been some interest from another project they expressed, but it would not be in your jurisdiction per se. At this time, I don't have anyone that I know of. But again, if they're not coming for incentives, I might not know. I don't have anyone that I know of right now that is in the process and under that request for a power letter that has spent that money up front to get what they would need. So you have some time is what I'm saying, because that has a multi-month lead. But if they're not coming to me for either to talk to about, incentives or rezoning, and they're already under process, if it's zoned industrial out there and they're talking to a property owner, it is possible. I don't know, because the power providers are under no obligation, and maybe it'd be inappropriate for them to bring me in on that. But to answer your question in a more succinct way, I don't have a timeline. I just feel that there is, obviously what we're seeing out there across the landscape, an urgency to have be more prepared than not. And so, again, if you can add those regulations to make it as least impactful as possible, I think the better.
Vice Chairman Jones, anything else? I've lost her. Again, I think the intent is...
Yes, sir.
Oh,
Mr. Chairman.
go ahead, Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I do thank you, and I understand that of what you're stating, Mr. Chairman, as well as what Robert is stating. I was just wondering if perhaps, I know that we're just looking into this as we are other options as well, as I understand all that what you both said, and I appreciate that. I didn't know if perhaps those that are interested in this, as he was stating, that it may or may not be a good opportunity. Of course, we keep our community in mind. I just didn't know if those that have expressed interest, since we're talking about those companies, if they have said to you, Robert, that they would like to hear back within a significant time. again, I know all the conversation and I'm keeping up with all that and I articulate and understand that. So I appreciate you both on that. But because this is a lot of conversation in our community, and of course, any investor, no doubt, that would like opportunities, and it doesn't mean that it is or is not as we're in the discussion stage, but just out of complete transparency, I didn't know if the company had stated to you or not, because they do have an interest, if they would like to hear back just our thoughts by a certain time, I guess would be the more transparent or better way to word and frame that question. I didn't know if they had, of course, no doubt, there's opportunities for not just the data centers, but anyone that might be looking to come and invest in Fayetteville. But since we are talking about the data centers, I just didn't know if those particular companies, no doubt, had stated that they would maybe like a follow-up by a certain time would be a more appropriate and fair way to frame that question.
No, Vice Chairman Jones, do not have anyone in particular that is asking for a specific response time from the county.
Okay, thank you. That was what the question was. I appreciate it.
Mr. Chairman, if I just made one last point,
Sure.
to say, want to be clear to anyone who does end up watching this online that we greatly appreciate the staff talking about this, the city staff talking about this. I think from all of this came from as these issues rose in relevance, we got out there and we actually pulled the ordinances and said, hey, we probably should have more here. So with full clarity, I want folks to know that from the economic development perspective, we're encouraging you to add to your ordinances, to put specific regulations in, and to be prepared so that your staff is well equipped to respond when and if, unless they go to space, these data centers come looking. But we appreciate you considering it. Again, I think it's always best to say what we want up front as opposed to trying to react after the question's been asked. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Van Geens. Again, I think to your point, it's how we set the conditions now on the front side of this for the type of investment in the community we want to see, so that we're not doing it in a reactive way. So that's I think not only our staff, but the community leaning forward into being proactive on this, as well as the economic development side. No other questions for Mr. Van Geens. We'll go ahead and move to item 3.
One more question.
Vice Chairman Jones, do you have a comment?
She's got no more questions.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll go ahead and move to item 3, county zoning. County Manager Greer.
Yes,
Excuse me, I have one more question for Mr. Robert.
I'm sorry, Vice Chairman Jones, you have another question for Mr. Van Geens?
Yes, I do for
Okay,
Mr.
Robert, Vice Chairman has another question. Go ahead with your question, Vice Chairman.
I just want you to reiterate that. So you are stating that in the event, since, of course, no doubt, this is just all in discussion stage when it comes to data centers, if they may or may not be coming here. I have a question. So that does mean, no doubt, if the commissioners decided to put in particular in advance guidelines and structure guidelines and rules and regulations, we are able to do that, correct? I don't know if that's a question for you or Rick, but say that, again, this is just all in exploratory stages, but I think that being transparent for our community with concerns that are out there. So if or if not, since we're being proactive, if the commissioners did decide to go that route, we are allowed to put in certain guidelines and structures, yes or no?
Oh, absolutely. And I believe Rawls will be speaking to you shortly about your current ordinances and potential ideas on how that can be, and new changes can be incorporated into yours to strengthen that.
Okay, sounds like I might have jumped ahead then, but since that was on my mind, I did want to put that out there. Thank you for answering that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vice Chairwoman. We'll go ahead and move to item 3, county zoning, and just board. We've got the meeting scheduled 2 to 4. I want to be respectful of people's time. So if we can, you can look to your responses and questions around that. And again, if we've got a series of questions after, we'll have the ability to pass those into the county manager and we can get feedback on this. I just want to again be respectful of people's afternoons, and this was a late called meeting because we wanted to make sure after the last agenda session we moved it off of it. So again, we're going to try to come out of here at 4 p.m. And I'll turn it back over to County Manager Greer.
Yes, Rawls Howard, Director of Inspections and Planning. The planning inspections will provide what we currently have is zoning. Well, other local governments are providing zoning, planning and zoning requirements and propose future county planning and zoning requirements.
Right.
Rawls.
So thank you very much, Commissioners, and thank you, Robert, for a very holistic explanation of these types of uses. I only have 2 slides, so keeping you to your 4 o'clock, I'll certainly be doing that.
You may have a lot of questions,
So it's
Mr.
going to be on y'all to tell me, right? So the goal of this is just basically just go over where staff is right now, what I'm kind of hearing or seeing across the landscape for county governments primarily, not so much the city. And where our philosophy stands right now. We were viewing this more of a Q&A, so you could try to give us a little bit of some information as we kind of move forward with our regulatory standards. But again, I only have a couple of slides here. So the primary area of focus for staff with regards to the data centers, and I think that the slide that Robert had with the scale of the various different types of data centers was very good. So keep that in mind as we go through this explanation. Before we get into how we are proposing to put some regulations for these types of uses and where a lot of other folks stand, I can tell you how we currently handle these uses now. If you look at our zoning code right now, our code basically dictates, and it says shall, that staff is obligated that if a use comes in, we cannot say no to any type of use. We are obligated by our ordinance to find a comparable use on our permitted use table that most closely aligns to whatever the use is that you're bringing to the table to us. And so that's something that we deal with quite a bit. When you look at our current ordinance, we would dictate currently right now if a data center came in, we would probably classify it in the same use of a warehouse and a call center. And that's just by the scale. Now, I'm talking about the big scale centers. I'm not talking about anything that's accessory, and I'll get into that here in just a minute. But if you're talking about the big standalone centers that are come in, we would classify that as a warehouse or a call center just due to the size, the parking, and the amount of employment that's involved, and the various other aspects that we look at when we try to be able to establish these classifications. Those uses are allowed by right in our MP zoning district, okay? So MP is our manufacturing district. That's our heaviest classification for manufacturing in the county. You're going to find these in our corporate centers. You're going to find them in like areas throughout the county that are on large scales, tracts of land. Now, you heard Robert talk about utilities and things like that. More often than not always, but I know that the EDC is very good about working with us and identifying these sites proactively that are near high transmission lines, that are near like transportation corridors and near certain areas that are already zoned for this right now. So more often than not, if somebody were to come in today and say, I want to put in a data center, and they go to an MP zone, I would hold them to the standards of a warehouse or a call center, and then we would just issue the permit and just have them out the door. They'd be held to the standards that we have right now. So there's that. We do not have a standalone type of identifier for a data center or anything like that. That would be something that we have to create in order to put into our ordinance and define that, as Robert had dictated before. So Robert also mentioned folks that have these on the third floor, so to speak. You know, folks that have this as a part of their operation. We would treat that as an accessory use, meaning that we wouldn't regulate that at all. That would just be an electrical permit that somebody wants to put on their third floor or your business, depending on the scale of how big it is, whether or not we would classify it as an accessory use. But if we do class it as that, that's pretty straightforward. So some of the main considerations that staff is looking at for these data centers as we start to look at what types of regulations that we're going to put in place is basically a summary of what Robert had just said. It's really 3 primary components: utility capacity, noise, and area compatibility. So that's the main sort of lens that staff is looking through right now as we're starting to get ordinances in from other counties, and we have been doing this research as we get other folks coming in with these types of ordinances. If you want to boil it down, that's what staff is looking at through the glasses that we're looking at are those 3 types of uses right now. So some of the goals that we're primarily looking at now, and again, this is staff level. If you as the board come back and say that, that this is the way that you need to be looking at this, or some of the other goals that you would like for us to look at, we can certainly entertain that, and we will, is just to simply keep it simple. We're not looking to be able to get into sort of the discussions about the megawatts and everything like that. As Robert had mentioned, all of that is really more geared towards the power utility company. What we're seeing in ordinances is that we're going to focus strictly on the type of land use of like the noise, as I said before, the area compatibility and the utility capacity. Now, we're not the ones from a planning and zoning to be able to say that you can only have X amount of, gigawatts or megawatts or whatever, that's going to be up to the utility company to tell us that. We're not getting, at least as we're proposing it now, we're not getting into that boat. And I think, as was mentioned before, you have the hyperscale, which you saw before is the big, like size facilities that come in. When we were talking about this internally, a lot of our conversation and focus was the attention to the local needs versus the non-local needs. So that being said, as Robert had said, that there's a lot of these companies like Apple, Google, Red Hat, all these folks that have sort of these accessory uses on their campus that might have these data centers that flow all their information for their own proprietary use for what they do. Do we give less weight to that, to a major hyper center that comes in, that maybe the data is for people all over the world, that maybe, as he said, just provides a small handful of jobs, has a huge utility impact? I can tell you that most of the ordinances that we're seeing with the counties right now is a lot of these folks are only focusing on the hyperscale, meaning that if you're like the big person that's coming in, that's really a lot of the counties. I've looked at Pitt.
Neighborhood tomorrow from.
I'm sorry.
Vice Chairman, if you could mute, please.
All right.
So what we're seeing as standard from counties is that they're focusing on the big ones. They're not really so much focusing on the smaller scale or the accessory uses. And so far, that's where staff is coming from, is kind of falling in line with what a lot of the other counties are doing right now. So anyway, so that's the two goals that we were looking at as we move forward with that. Some thoughts and considerations. As I just said, just speaking of the hyperscale versus the small scale, accessory versus principal use, staff is in a position right now, unless sort of directed otherwise, is that we're only going to focus on the hyperscale. If you're an accessory use, a true accessory use, and you're not growing that accessory use past your principal use, we're not going to get into the boat of what you got going on your property. The hyperscale ones, as Robert had stated, are the ones that generate a lot of the electricity. They deal a lot with the water, so we think we're going to put some considerations in place mainly to address those types of uses. The approval process. And so what I mean for that is what you heard before. Does it need to go through an SUP, conditional zoning? Does the commissioners believe that it should be allowed by right? Staff is of the opinion that some of these ought to be allowed by right with conditions. If you can prove to us that you've met X, Y, and Z, we'll just let you go ahead and give you the permit to go forward. I think that what Robert had brought up about the power generation on site is absolutely valid. That, if we want to, that if you're generating your power on site and you want to go through an SUP process, we can certainly do that. Or if the commissioners want to have it go through a legislative process, you can go through a conditional zoning. So you get to pick whether you want to hear it or whether you want the Board of Adjustment to be able to hear it through a quasi-judicial process, or the Board of Commissioners being able to hear it through a legislative process. Both of those processes have their pluses and minuses. So like the legislative process is going to be much more flexible for y'all to make a decision as to how you want to approve or disapprove. The quasi-judicial, you got to go through findings, and generally speaking, what I've been trained is that if you go through the findings and they meet all of the findings, the board has to grant the permit. They can't deny it. So that's going to be up to this board how you want to do that, but those are things that we're going to work through as we go through our ordinance drafting, okay? And then there's the utility considerations. I'm a native of Edgecombe County. I don't know if you've heard in the news, but they've been going through the data center discussion out there pretty strong. And so what they have been dealing with, which I kind of like in their ordinance, is they just basically put the requirement for utilities to the utility company, meaning they allow certain of these types of uses to come by right, but they require a utility attestation, meaning that the power or the water company has to give a certified letter to them saying that they have the capacity to meet it, and then that's all they need. And then at that point, they will issue the permits if they meet all the other standards. Staff is somewhat in that boat, that we're not in the utility business per se. So that's kind of where we're leaning right now. But again, we're going to go through this as a discussion as we move forward. What districts should we go in? Currently, right now, as I mentioned, if one were to come today, it would only be allowed in the MP district how we interpret the ordinance. Do we want to put it maybe by special use or conditional use permits in our light industrial? How do we want to do that? I think there's some people they're putting in their commercial districts, which I would not recommend here for us. So we're going to go through those discussions as we go through the planning board and all the process for drafting our code. So some of the next steps that we're working on, again, I told you I was going to try to keep this very high level and quick. Right now we're doing staff Research and coordination, I see Dr. Newton and Craig over there from the city of Fayetteville. I want to say thank you for your staff to provide us what the city is currently working on right now. We pulled some, we've reached out to counties. Our planning staff is doing a really good job right now about doing the research to make sure we get all the information. So we're currently at that stage right now. Next would be drafting an amendment. It would go to a subcommittee of our planning board. This is a codes committee that's made up of a small delegation of our planning board members. We actually have a planning board member that was very excited about this topic. He's worked in data centers, and so we're going to be bringing him on board in order to help sort of draft what we, our code language. Then at that point, we take that, what comes out of the subcommittee, to the planning board for their recommendation, and then we, of course, we move to you just like we do any other text amendment. So once we get started, and once we have all of our data collected and everything like that, we're envisioning we can get through this in 90 days, barring we taking it to this board and then you want to make changes or tell us to kick it back and have further discussion on it. So that's all I have. If you got any questions, I'll try to answer what I can.
I'm sure we're going to have some questions, Mr. Howard.
Sure.
Ken, is there anything to add before we,
Nothing else to add. I think Mr. Howard took care of everything.
Commissioner Adams, you're recognized.
I just have the one question, because I just didn't understand it. So, and that's why I asked Rick to come back in. So in the Helene bill, the last sentence in there was talking about downsized zoning for municipalities, that they no longer have the ability to do that, even in those non-conforming areas. I don't understand this. I'm just trying to figure out what that means.
Sure. So, I mean, basically, if you're allowed, I mean, I just got back from a zoning conference and the School of Government just went over this. So basically, if you're in the MP zoning district and it allows 42 uses, for example, you can't cut one and say that you're only allowed to do 41 or 40 or less. If we draft this, in my opinion, you're adding a use that you're allowed to do in that district. You're not taking one away. So it's not really a down zoning per se, because you're allowing a use that was not there before.
Well, I guess the follow-up is, so I got a piece of property, and people, we don't want to put it there, but the property owner, you got to go to the property owner to try to we can't downsize it. I'm just trying to figure it out. If it's already zoned that way and they're getting ready to move in there and we say, oh, no, we don't want to put it because it's next to that residential, or is it a little bit further down from that non-residential, we can't do that under that statute. I don't know.
No, I mean, if they were to come in today, I think it's an interpretive issue of when they filed their application. And then I would say that under our current ordinance, I would say that I have to give you a designation by our code. I mean, our code says I can't prohibit anything, especially if it's listed in the permitted use table. So I have to give you a designation somewhere. So I give that to you today, and then if I say that you're a warehouse or a call center by our code, and then you're permitted, then he's out the door as a legal use underneath our current ordinance today. If we add this, we're not taking a use away from the chart. We're just adding another one there, and then if another one comes in, we would regulate you underneath that standard.
So basically it says right now we can't go out there and say we're going to downsize that, so you can't put it there. Is that kind of what that's saying?
The downsizing that is referred to by that statute is that we can't, the county itself cannot take any existing district and change it in such a way that you have less uses or less numbers of parcels can be. That's all it is. It's fine to add or that sort of stuff, and it's fine for an owner to do so.
Right.
Thank you.
And just to point to that, there's some movement afoot in the General Assembly to get that back, pull that away.
Yes.
So,
which would be good.
I agree. Commissioner Tyson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I guess to Mr. Van Gien's and Commissioner Adams' point, Mr. Chairman, we're talking about a use that's a wide range of different types of product. And this question may be appropriate for you, Howard, or to the county attorney. So if we know that by adding an additional use, and if it's permitted by right, at that point, if we wanted to change it, that would be downzoning under the current rules. So I guess my question is, can we add this as a conditional zoning or special use permit only? And so that would be permitted, and then that way, if we wanted to modify that in the future, that would not be considered the down zoning.
Yeah, in my opinion, I think that however you want to approve it or disapprove it is fully at your discretion, whether that's through conditional zoning, SUP, or if you want to allow it by right. again, I think what I'm seeing, I mean, I see a mixed bag. I see people going the SUP route, and I know, Rick, you weren't here, but I think like in my opinion to you, I think as a board, it would depend on, do you want it to be heard as a legislative process, or do you want to be heard as an evidentiary findings of fact process, which have their own sort of like nuances of how we can grant it or not, and how much flexibility that you have as a board
I didn't want it supposed
to
to be
have those
sunny, but when
deliberations.
it's 12 with enough.
Go ahead.
That's about it. I mean, it's really up to your discretion how you want to hear it. So staff is going to make a proposal based off what we're seeing across the sort of the landscape, so to speak. We'll of course have Rick involved with the review of the code that we draft. But for the most part, when we bring it to you, if you say that you want to make tweaks or changes at that hearing, or if you want to say kick it back, we'll fully do whatever the board wants to do.
And Mr. Chairman, as a follow-up, I think based on that and what's been presented, I would be more favorable as a special use permit, because we could delineate what the findings of fact are based upon that. And as this evolves, if we needed to modify those findings of fact, it sounds like what's being said is we could do that without it being considered a down zoning.
This is the type of activity or business or industry that would be subject to a special use permit.
Commissioner Tyson, anything else?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's it.
Commissioner Patel, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Howard, for the presentation. So I understand you're working on the text amendment for the county and would be looking mostly just at hyperscalers, but considering that the city's obviously done a lot of work as well, and I would imagine if our community did move forward with the previous presentation and discussions around the constraints on some of our resources, if we're looking at hyperscaler type users and we do end up doing a project in the county, I wouldn't imagine we'd have more than one or two. So in order to gain the most tax benefits for the community at large, if it's within a municipality where we can benefit from the county side and, whether it's City of Fayetteville or another municipality, for example, what are the differences in how the county would approach it versus maybe the city?
Sure, yeah, and that's a good question. So just know that all of the 8 towns that my department has purview over, they have their own ordinances. So this would just be the unincorporated county, and then Eastover by their action has agreed to adopt our ordinance. So if anything happens out in these areas, it would be for the unincorporated area, and by default, it would be Eastover as well too. Okay, I just wanted to put that out there. As far as the towns are concerned, I think we're a little bit different. I mean, especially since the city's relationship with PwC and how they operate, which we don't really have so much here with the county. So to me, it just depends on how granular that we want to get with this. How much do we want to break it out, make somebody go through a process depending on what type of center they are and whatnot. We have contacted the city of Fayetteville. We've gotten their data. My staff has talked with their staff. They've been great to work with. And so we are looking at their standards, and we are, like we learn from each other. We see stuff in there that say, hey, we didn't think about that. Maybe we ought to include it. But, at the end of the day, I think the cities are going to look at it through their lens, especially since they have the tie to the utility company, and maybe there's some different considerations on their end that they need to consider in putting their codes versus what we put in our codes. But I think as a county, again, just to go back to this, we're going to try to keep it as simple as possible, because as I think Commissioner Faircloth had just said, this is new technology. So, I mean, as far as going out there and just trying to hit every nail with the hammer, we're going to try to just focus on the land use and the core public health issues and the utility issues that are the most prevalent, because we can always add as we go along. And if we need to break it out and do other things, we can certainly do that as we sort of hit and pivot as we move. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. I'm just looking at if this is to come to fruition at some point in the future, we capture all of the benefits that we can for the community at large. So,
yes, sir.
So there's got to be some alignment, I would imagine. But thank you.
Yeah, we're certainly going to take a look at their ordinance and see what we can glean from it and what makes sense for our county. Right.
That makes sense. Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Commissioners, other questions? So, Director Howard, you would be looking for, first of all, the total 90 days, that clock started already?
Well, I mean, I wanted to have this meeting, I'm glad we did, because, I mean, you know, a big part is we're kind of treading uncharted waters. I know Fayetteville's been working on doing their research for a few months, and so, I mean, but there's been communities that have already done this research out there, so I don't think we really need to reinvent the wheel. I think we just kind of pull the pieces out of stuff that we think is germane to what we need, and then we move forward. So I think sort of moving today, the plan is I can probably bring you back a draft around May-ish, and then, you know, so that's going to be our goal, and so I think we're going to try to be able to work through our staff and our research and try to get something to the planning board quickly.
And do you need any direction, consensus from this body on the front side of this? In other words, you know, from a legislative or quasi-judicial to help you frame what you're going to frame and move forward?
Yeah, I think what I heard was you want all the uses by SUP. At least I heard that from Commissioner Tyson. Right, but so I guess overall, I'm just looking, it's like, do you guys want to lean towards more trying to get these in the community, or do you want us to, or, you know, just sort of a vibe about what you feel about the uses in general? And I think we can kind of interpolate that enough to create something that we can get you. So.
And when we get to the commissioner discussion, I'm going to try to make sure we get the information you need so that the manager has the staff direction.
Okay.
I just wanted to make sure I capture those. Other questions for Director Howard? All right.
Thank you.
I think we're good. We'll go ahead and move to item 4, Commissioner discussion. And it sounds like we've got a couple points. County Manager, just as we begin to have these conversations, you know, what you need for next steps. I kind of hear the question around legislative or quasi. Is there anything on any other points you need from the regulatory standpoint? I don't know from an economic development standpoint if there's some points we need to provide to Mr. Van Giens.
Not right now. I think we first got to get how we want to legislate and create ordinances around this.
Okay. All right, I'll open up commissioners for a round of discussion, and we'll go one round and see where we are. Commissioner Tyson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I previously stated, my initial reaction would be to go through a special use permit process for permitting this particular use. However, I would be interested in seeing the framework that staff would recommend for all 3 options so that we could see if we do the special use permit route, what does that look like? What kind of restrictions or what findings of fact staff would recommend that we look at in that process? And then if we go to the legislative process, what that framework would look like and what they would recommend, we kind of frame that up. I think we all know if it's permitted by right, what that would look like, but I would still, and for me, just like to see where they would anticipate having that as a permitted by right versus having some special stipulations, Mr. Chairman. So that would be my input, and I appreciate your time.
So a question on that, County Manager Greer, you know, based on your staff's time, would you like to have that, would you like to have a clear direction on one of those options? So in other words, the staff would bring back, present that, and then we can give you some direction, and then you're going down one road versus 3.
One road, right?
I'm sorry?
One road, right?
So in other words, do you want us to, do we want to get the 3 options presented that have been discussed, come back, we get some direction, and then you start this process, or you just want to go through this process and bring back all 3?
I would encourage, because we do have an appointed board, I would say let's try to use our board. I mean, again, I have somebody on that board. As soon as he heard data centers, he came and said, I want to be a part of that. I have worked with this for years. I'd like to be a part of that. So I think maybe let us get through the planning board, like the subcommittee process, just kind of get their ideas, and I can draft something up, then bring it to you and say, what do you think?
As an intermediate step before it comes back to us in May.
Correct.
Okay.
But we'll have a discussion of all 3 options as part of that process.
Commissioner Adams, you recognize.
I think when we do this, because this board needs to, at the end of the day, decide, because it's in the community, I would not do the judiciary. I don't think those findings of fact, they lead you right into court and gonna get you sued if you don't make the proper findings of facts and all that. So I would be opposed to that version and go to the second version.
Commissioners, other discussion points? Any other information we may need back or additional information from either the economic development side or the regulatory side? Commissioner Patel, you're recognized.
I would just like to support, at least having the planning board committee work on this. I think it'll allow us to glean some more insight from, the various areas and municipalities and what everyone's thinking.
Okay. Commissioner Fairclough, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. We need to keep in mind as we're working through this, the potential concerns in the community, and I've heard people very concerned about noise, very concerned about energy use and squeezing other people out of the grid and raising rates and water use, and same problem, raising rates and squeezing people out of the use and then not being able to put it back into the basin and that sort of thing. So from a regulatory standpoint, noise, energy, and water use are the complaints that I've heard in the community, and they're valid complaints. I have the same concerns. And then from an economic development standpoint, using tax incentives to lure these things here. These things have got to be developed, and that part won't necessarily be from the planning board and staff standpoint, but we will have to talk about incentives and whether we want to give away tax money to bring something in that people are very, very concerned about. And so by the time we get our first bite, so to speak, in this fishing expedition, we need to decide, is there anything out there that would be worth giving away tax dollars for? And that's always been job production in our venue, but also it could be the amount of infrastructure and what it could do for our tax base. So those are the things we have to consider. At this stage of the game, I'm very negative on incentives at all, unless they're going to somehow produce jobs or substantial increment in the tax base. That's going to be an ongoing thing and not just a 5 to 7 year depreciation down to nothing thing that Patel and I talked about real early. And those are my concerns from a regulatory standpoint and from a economic development standpoint that we need to be concerned about.
So I know Vice Chair, I'm going to recognize Vice Chairman Jones next, just to Commissioner Fairclough to clarify from Mr. Van Gien's side. You have said I'm not going to recommend any incentives in this space.
I can't right now see any reason why you would.
Okay. Vice Chairman Jones, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My concern is that of some of what Commissioner Fairclough has stated, but also that of just being very transparent, hearing different things, as this is a very sensitive subject in the community. What I would like to see is, I think this is great, these next steps, staff research and coordination, drafting amendment process to voting, but I would also like for our community to be engaged. And what I mean by that, the concerns that I've been hearing in the community is that of, although they are appreciative to this meeting in the afternoon, as we know, people are at work, and I know people are going to say, oh, well, people can watch it on YouTube, but the reality is a lot of people would like more of an initiative to have that of questions they can ask. Perhaps that when staff does go through these different additional steps, or maybe even prior to that, or as information is provided, some of the things I've been hearing from the community is that they would allow for, a lot of people work 9 to 5, that they can't see this, although it's taped, they want to watch it later, they want to be more engaged. So perhaps we could have a webinar or something set up to where individuals can ask their concerns, and then have this viewed in the evening, where it's realistically, meaning that a town hall or webinar because a lot of people work 8 to 5. And those that are retired are not really retired, they're doing things in the day. Matter of fact, I was just at town hall for black women on the candidate ballot last night. Those were big concerns that people had. They feel that although they're appreciative, that would of what our economic development is doing, they're not very accurate on what's factual and what's not, because they feel like the information from the city and the county is not getting out there enough to be able to address their concerns. So what I'm putting forth of initiative, and hopefully I'll be supported by the board, perhaps we can put some webinars of information education or a town hall, and as many people have stated, not in the middle afternoon, because just as we're working here, so are they. And they appreciate that they can watch this on YouTube, but as they stated, realistically, them seeing what we're discussing and they don't have an input is not making a very trustworthy or comfortability for our community. So those are some facts that I had informed the community that I would address, of which I am now, that I would like for my board members to take into consideration, as well as our staff. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So maybe we can implement town halls at a time period, as I stated, or webinars, so that engagement after 5 o'clock, maybe our staff can put that together so that working individuals, just as ourselves, can be able to partake. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chairwoman. And I think, to your point, maybe a way to look at it is create a public comment period specific to this topic to let the public come voice our concerns. We could put that into one of our meetings, our evening meetings in March or April, or wherever we would see to do that, and create a special comment period specifically for this, where citizens, we could set a time frame like we do in our normal public comment period and allow them to speak directly to the concerns that they have, or provide any questions that they may want answers back to. Maybe a way to do that. That's another option.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do like that idea. And in the event, if we do that, that we promote it somewhat. I've been hearing, comments about that too. Yes, people know when the meetings are, but just do some additional promotion in through PR or communication to get the word out, if that's going to take place, or a special segment of question times at an evening meeting. That's another concern I've been hearing, education for our community, but getting it out, not just saying, hey, you can come sign up, making it an intentional initiative on our social media to inform people that on that meeting and what they need to do. A little bit more promotion is what I've been hearing also for concerns, because of course, no doubt we are here to serve and make sure our community is getting that of what they need. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Vice Chairman. Commissioners, other questions, other comments, other discussion? All right, well, let's go ahead and move to item 5, next steps. I think what I've heard is a couple things. We'll go ahead and, based on recommendation from Director Howard, go ahead and take the next steps with a preliminary draft coming back to us. County Manager, I'm going to give you a couple things and let me know your thoughts on them, but, Commissioners first. Bring back a draft of that initial into the March meeting to give us an insight. I know you'll still be in the process, but give us an inside glimpse to glean any feedback, and then continue the process so that we would look to have a final ordinance on or about the May timeframe, so in that May work session. Create a public comment period. I think it would be better to do that sooner rather than later, so the planning team can hear some of those potential concerns maybe. Maybe we look to do that at our March 16th meeting on the front side of it. We can allocate, a time period to it, our normal public comment time period to it maybe, and make it specific to the data center conversation and topic. Maybe we allocate 30 minutes of public comment period. We can use it or not use it. Give each individual, like our normal public comment, 3 minutes to speak, and we go from there. Those would be the actions that I see, and of course we'd want to, if we do that, I know that we'll promote and talk about that the public would have the opportunity in that public comment period. So those would be the next steps that I kind of heard coming out of here. Commissioners, are we kind of comfortable in that direction? Is there anything else we want to see? Anything else we need from County Manager? Does that give you what you need in the next steps on a time frame?
Yes.
All right, so we're going to see, thank you, Vice Chairman. So we'll see that.
I'm sorry, I just had one more request on that.
Go ahead, Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think those are great steps, and I think that we're all in alignment on the board, and I think that would be great, like, as you stated, March 16th. And if some way possible as well, it's because, of course, we don't want to leave out people that do work at night and that can't make it. Is there any way that our communications or PO team could put something out for questions that could be submitted for individuals perhaps that can't make it, questions that could be submitted by a certain allocated time, that staff at that particular night meeting, not all of the questions, no doubt, but something to be put out or made, where people can have a time period frame to say, please submit your questions by a certain timeline. And then if we see an alignment of the same similar questions being asked, we will select those that seem to be the most majority that are where staff could do, they can state just that. We understand that people work at night, those that sign up to come for public comment, fine, but then there would be a few select questions that were pre-submitted that the staff could put together. They see a lot of, say, 5 of the same type of alignment questions, pick maybe 5 or 6 that they could state, make a presentation and say, here are some that were pre-submitted that we want to be able to address.
Vice Chairman, so I think there's a couple things there. I think that's a great addition. I think we could create, if the board's okay with it, create a way for the public to submit any questions that then could be packaged by staff and then a presentation back out to this board if we wanted to do that, to answer some of those questions. Mm-hmm. We could also, in that public comment period, if somebody's unable to attend, we could have them be able to submit written public comments to our clerk, and those could be, read in or provided to the commissioners as well. So if they weren't able to come in and speak, they can provide written comments that would be then passed to the commissioners. And then if there were questions, we could set up a different mechanism to receive any questions there may be. And then at another opportunity, staff could come back and respond to those questions to the board as well as to the public.
I'd appreciate that, and that way we can also include those. Many times, sometimes it's difficult to get out for individuals that are disabled. That way we're making sure inclusive for all different genres of our communities. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so the only two other things that we would add to that is we need to look at how we receive those questions and kind of a process for that. So County Manager Greer, I'll give that to you. I would just brief us on it, on the process that we're going to do it, with an anticipation that you're bringing back those questions in a March or April work session. Just let us know how you want to do that process, and you can just update us by email, and then it can, of course, go out to the public as far as so they're aware. And then we'll add that written comment period so people can submit written comments, and those will be provided to the board. And the last thing I would ask, Madam Clerk, if you will make sure that the commissioners get both of these slide decks and that they are posted online back into the agenda portal or where the public can access them as well. Commissioners, is that good for next steps? We comfortable with that? County Manager, you good? I'll go ahead and move to item 6. I don't think we don't have any future meetings. We'll use our normal work session, agenda sessions for the meetings. Board, I'd ask you if there's any other items to come before this body at this meeting germane to this data center topic. Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Commissioner Tyson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I make a motion that we adjourn.
We've got a motion to adjourn. It's been properly seconded. All in favor, raise your right hand or say aye.
Aye.
And we're adjourned.